and YouTube. Welcome to the Athens Women's Football Series, which is live on Facebook and YouTube. My name is Shon Osimbo. The conversation about women's football and its growth across the globe continues tonight. It's already 9 p.m. here in East Africa, where I'm based, that is Nairobi, Kenya. And it's very lovely to have two lovely women who I'll be introducing very, very soon as we continue to talk about, the women's football across the globe, its growth, what is happening on the ground. And also we get to understand the experiences from the pitch side and also the media side. So before we get down to that, quickly, let me just talk a bit about Athens Women's Football Series. We are counting down to the main event, and we have less than 19 days to this big event, which will be held in Athens, Greece. That is on the 22nd and 23rd of this month. So if you want to grab your ticket, here's how to do it, and we have a lovely offer for you. $100 off for the 2 days. If you grab your ticket right now, just scan the discount code, scan what is on your screen right now. The discount code is Athens WFS10. That is what you get. $100 off for that ticket, which gives you entry to the 22nd and 23rd. That is when the event will be going down. I can't wait for it. Now, today we'll be talking to two wonderful ladies, award-winning women's football writer and author Susie Wrack, and sports icon and also author Susie Petruccelli. I hope I've said that right. It's very
Perfect.
lovely to have these ladies here. They will take us through just why they decided to put their thoughts on paper and share the experiences of what they have seen in the women's football world with also the rest of the globe. So quickly, welcome to the show, ladies. Let me start with you, Susie Petruccelli. Kindly introduce yourself to the Athens Women's Football Summit audience.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. And again, my name is Susie Petruccelli, and I'm an American. I grew up in Southern California. Luckily for me, I was rejected from my family's two favorite sports. When I was 4 and 5 years old, I wasn't allowed to play American football, and I wasn't allowed to play baseball. And I was just growing up right at the time when Title IX was starting to take effect in the United States, and they were starting to open up soccer for girls in my town. And so I rode that wave of soccer with so much joy and passion and love for the game, all the way to get to play at Harvard, where I got to be captain when I was a senior. And it became the basis for the book that I wrote. Then the book was published first in England and was just published in New York last year. And then I have made a couple of films, one with Equal Playing Field. That group of women is so amazing. And then one with this woman, Kelly Nascimento DeLuca, who's one of Pele's daughters. We're still working on that one now. And then my current position, I just started a fellowship on Monday, actually, back at Harvard. And we're going to try to equalize the prize money between the men's and women's World Cups. So lots to do.
Wonderful. I can't wait to get deep into that. Susie Wrack, it's your turn. Kindly talk to us and just introduce yourself to us.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I'm Susie Wrack, and I am football writer for The Guardian. And I've written a book called A Women's Game, which is a bit of a social political history of women's football, I'd say. So looks at the game and its growth and development over the years, in the context of what's happening in the world at each stage of that development and things like that. I'm currently, apologies for background noise, in a bar in Vienna, a bar restaurant in Vienna. I'll show it to you. That's really pretty. Because England are playing here tomorrow night. So I stay in Vienna. It's just an hour south of Vienna in this tiny little place called Wiener Neustadt, where England are playing tomorrow night. And it's I try to order food in time for doing this, and so my food is sitting on the table over there, but a little bit delayed, but it'll be all right. But it's quite weird because we've gone from Wembley for the Euros final with 90,000 people to this tiny little place, and we did the press conference in a tent outside the stadium today.
Oh, wow.
And there's 2,000 people at the game tomorrow, even though Austria are semi-finalist at the Euros and did really well. So development doesn't always go in a straight line absolutely everywhere. But yeah, good times. But yeah, that is me.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sparing your time to talk to us. So quickly, and I know that experience, especially, just being in England, winning the Euros, the excitement is still there, but we've also seen the journey of, the England women's team. So talk to us. The football has been on the rise and it has come a long way. What are your thoughts currently, as much as you're still cheering, the England team on? What are your thoughts about the state of the women's game at the moment? Susie Wrack, let's start with you.
It's really, I mean, in England, really healthy. I mean, there's problems. There always is. But at the moment, in terms of if you're looking at sort of the top end of the game and the development at national team level and with the Women's Super League, there's like so many positive things going on in terms of investment and growth and investment in coaching and refereeing. The broadcast rights deal for the Women's Super League with Sky and BBC has really exploded the audience for the domestic game. And then you've got dropping my phone. Then you've got the Barclays sponsorship deal of the Women's Super League and the Women's Championship now. And the money from the broadcast rights deal going back in, 25% of that money going to the Championship and 75% for the Women's Super League. So there is a little bit of a trickle down there in the way that there isn't for the men's broadcast rights deal in the Premier League. So there's a real positive aspects of things. There's still huge gaps. I still very much think there's an over-reliance on men's clubs to be investing in women's football and less support for the teams that are sort of doing it on their own and sort of trying to build the game and clubs in a much more sustainable and healthy way, I think. But overall, it's been huge. I mean, the game, the FA announced a friendly against the US, shortly after the final, and it sold out within less than 24 hours at Wembley. So another 90,000, potentially a bigger crowd even, because I'm sure you can get a few more in there than we did for the final. And the interest was huge. I mean, there were queues at points online of 50, 60,000 people, like online in queues trying to get tickets to watch England play the US in a friendly. But it shows sort of just how big the impact of that Euros win is. And it's still very much there. That high hasn't died down yet. Arsenal have sold over 38,500 tickets for their North London derby game with Tottenham in September, which would break the WSL record if they hit that. And then there's been good ticket sales at a lot of other places. Loads of clubs have either sold out of their season tickets or have significantly, sort of 200-300% increases on their season tickets from last year. So there's real signs that really for the first time ever, you're seeing the major tournament impact the domestic game as well, which is a huge step because that's been sort of the missing link is those tournaments massively, 2015 World Cup, 2019 World Cup, the 2012 Olympics, really getting big crowds in, but then that not translating down into the game and on domestic level. So yeah, it's been great, and it's still, there's still really good signs that there's a lot of good work being done to capitalize on that.
Yeah. And Susie Petruccelli, if you can just take us through that transition you've seen from your playing days to what is happening currently. What do you think is from your side, from your perspective? Talk to us about just, how the women's game has come across all these years.
Yeah, I mean, so when I started, it was just at the beginning of the first Women's World Cup, right? I mean, I remember being at Stanford soccer camp when I was a junior in high school in 1991, and my camp counselor was Mary Harvey, and she was, training to go to China to be the goalie for the team, and at that time there was, we didn't really know who the players were. In America, the only soccer magazine was this one soccer magazine called Soccer America, and it only came out. I mean, you couldn't get it. It came in the mail every once in a while. I mean, it's very hard, and it was all dedicated, primarily to men's soccer. So it was very hard to get any info on the women's soccer team. or women's soccer at all. So obviously we've come so far. Title IX has done so much. Now there's millions of girls in the United States playing. We have this, beautiful, structure and, youth infrastructure for girls. The Division I schools now, Division I, II, and III schools in college are beautiful programs. So some of the Division I schools, have much higher standards than most of the pro teams around the world. So we've really come a long way. When we owe it all to all the Julie Foudies and the Billie Jean Kings and all those people that paved the way for us. Really with not a lot of recognition and not a lot of thanks and not a lot of awareness till pretty recently. And so we've really come a long way, but we have such a long way to go. I mean, there's stats coming out now that boys in the United States still get $1 billion more a year in sports scholarships, college sports scholarships. I mean, it's just really shocking when you think about it. And then the other thing I've been thinking about a lot lately is the amount of public funds that goes into men's sports, building these huge stadiums for men's sports. And one of the statistics I'm going to try to dig up right away is, just how much taxpayer money has gone into supporting men's sports, in the last 50, 60 years in the United States. And we're going to try to hold, our lawmakers accountable for that on the women's side and try to even that out. So we have a long way to go. I think the media, as Susie was saying, I think the media rights situation is going to be really interesting in the next decade, even, 5 to 10 years. The unbundling of the men's and women's, teams, at the international level. Things like that. Like, I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that progresses. I think it's really important that we unbundle them and start to value women's soccer on its own. But that's something I'm really, excited to see what happens in the next few years.
Yeah. And also one important thing is the books you two decided to, put out there and highlight the experiences and the growth of the game, which is very, very important because people need to understand, people need to understand the experiences, understand the history. Susie, Wrack, as you put it in your game. So let me just start with mentioning the two books. So A Woman's Game, The Rise, Fall, and Rise Again of Women's Football by Suzanne Wrack, I think that's how it is on the book, and Raised a Warrior, One Woman's Odyssey by Susie Petruccelli. So that is those are the books you two have put out there, and which are very important, and they are coming out. They have come out at the right time, when everyone is now, trying to see, oh wow, this is the women's game. Oh wow, this is what we need. So such important books. So let's start with you, Susie Wrack. Why did you decide to highlight these experiences and just share them with the world?
Susie's heard me say this, but I didn't actually want to write a book, or I had no intention of writing a book. I was actually approached by an agent, a really nice guy, Max, and who said, the Women's Euros are coming up in England. It'd be a great time to have a generalised history of women's football. And I was like, no thanks. I'm quite, early in my career, my job is quite intense, not interested. And then he sort of talked me into it. And I mean, the main thing was I didn't really want anyone else to write it. I knew what I wanted a book like that to be, and I'm quite political, and very socially conscious in the way I look at the world, and I wanted to see women's football put into that context of both what it's impacted by and what impact it can have, and I wasn't sure that if I didn't write that myself, that it would necessarily get written the way I would like to see it written. So that was sort of the reason why I said yes in the end. I hated every minute of writing it, couldn't stand it, but I sort of say I'm a writer that hates writing. I think when you're a writer, the writing process itself, actually at times it's enjoyable, but most of the time it's not that enjoyable. But it's the feeling of having written that is really enjoyable. When you finished and you filed the article, or you finished a book, is just next level because it's so much work. That's sort of why you do it. But I'm really happy with it. I think it does sort of what I wanted it to do, which was really contextualize the sport and make those links between the broader things that are going on in society. So 2012, you've got US sending a mainly women's team to the Olympics, and in terms of their entire US Olympic contingent or squad or whatever it's called. And you know, at the same time, you've got Obama being elected for a second term the year before, majority women vote helping him to that title. So like, what's the connection there? What does that mean? Why is it that we're seeing a big shift for women's representation in sport at the time that we're also seeing that kind of stuff happening? What is the context of that? They're the things that interest me, and the stories that I like to explore, and the ideas I like to look at. Because like, if you just write about the history of women's football, well, yes, it's got a really nice story and there's some great narratives in there, but you're not really looking at like why it's developed the way it has. And if you're not looking at why it's developed the way it has, you can't really have a say on its future and try and predict it, and you know, talk about the things that will change it more broadly, because you don't really know how it's being formed or shaped. So for me, that was what was really important, was telling the story in that way, and then doing it in a way that I felt in the end at points was quite personal as well, because I inserted like my own relationship to sport and my body and exercise into that too, because you know, that exists within you know, the pressures of society and the worlds that we live in, and that's an important part of the development of sport too.
Yeah. What about you, Susie? Why did you decide to share your experiences with the world?
So like Susie, I definitely didn't intend to write this particular book. When I was in college, well, first of all, I grew up being obsessed with sports movies. You know, the American sports movies are just epic, and Chariots of Fire, right? One of my favorite movies of all time. And we have this history of these beautiful sports stories. And you know, like, and I had two older brothers, and we would watch Hoosiers and Rudy and Field of Dreams and all these amazing movies that were my favorite movies as a kid. And I had this experience on my team at Harvard, and it started to feel like I was like, we were having that kind of experience. Like it had highs and lows, and there were struggles, and there were, you know, and there was triumph, and you know, I personally hit like suffered an injury and ended up hitting a rock bottom, and then, you know, had to have like my Rocky moment. Am I going to like give up, or am I going to dig deep and you know, like have a comeback? So the stories seemed to me at that time, I was thinking about it more like a screenplay. And we had like this pretty irreverent experience at Harvard too. You know, we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of funny things. Obviously very lucky there was no, you know, phone cameras at the time. And so that was sort of where my story came from. And I also wanted to honor my teammates, who were these really super inspiring people that I had never met, type of people I had never met before. You know, I mean, they're just really like magical, inspiring women that I was meeting, and made me think bigger, and made me have more ambition, and, you know, made me have more confidence in myself. And so my story really was focused on that. And then as I was like initially started to pitch the story, I realized really quickly that I kept hearing like these doors were shutting, like nobody wants to publish a women's sports story. Nobody wants to nobody wants a women's sports movie screenplay right now. Like, it's just not, there's no market for it, they kept saying. And so but I just kept looking, and what I ended up looking at, what I ended up finding as examples were documentaries, were nonfiction stories about people like Billie Jean King and the 99ers and Althea Gibson, and you know, so my experience trying to put my story out turned into my personal deep dive in the history of women's sports, that even though I was living it, right? I was living the effects of Title IX, literally, because it was the purpose of Title IX was to allow women to go to higher education and you know, stay in sports, right? So or have access to every academic program, including sports. So, you know, it was so the book ended up evolving into what it is over, honestly, like 20 years, like 2 decades, really. And luckily for me, as I was learning, I started meeting, like, you know, these amazing people who were in this amazing world of like sport for social good and like sport for development. And I just really, you know, it's so corny, but they say, like, you know, follow your heart and you'll find your purpose. And, like, you know, if you don't really know if you're feeling lost, just take one step at a time and just really trust your gut and trust your heart. And I have to say, like, that actually is what happened to me. I was at that time still so desperate to get back in touch with the game after my playing days were over, that like writing about it and thinking about it and reliving it in my mind and my heart was the next best thing. So it was funny. It was just like an organic, evolution of me wanting to stay in the game and honor my teammates. And then obviously like wanting to share this like pretty like intense history that I felt like people didn't know about and I felt was so important. And again, like Susie was saying, I tried to mix in a lot of my personal story to get to I guess to make sure that people would get to the end of the story. To me, the most important part of my book is the last third, the last section of the book, where I do talk about how far we've had to come and all these amazing people that have brought us here, and obviously where we need to go still. So that's kind of how, it was kind of a little untraditional, I guess, the way it happened for me. But yeah, it's been a great experience. It's been great.
Wonderful. And
Yeah.
Susie, we talk about in your book, you talk about the history from the game from all the way the 1920s and its revolution thereafter. But in your interviews and when you talk to people, you've always insisted, and also your reports, you've always insisted the coverage and people knowing about women's football is about changing attitudes towards female athletes and also giving them the respect they deserve. Talk to us about that.
Take myself off mute. Yeah, no, it's super important. Like I think the big thing, the thing that I love most about covering women's football is not going and necessarily covering the matches and just writing a match report, but it's telling the stories of the struggle and of what people are doing to use football to make the world a better place, right? It's a hugely powerful sport in so many ways. You think the power of some of the Premier League teams, for example, of the sort of love and loyalty they engender in their fan bases around the world makes them more trusted than governments in some worlds, and some parts of the country, some parts of the world in some countries, and that's a hugely powerful thing. They wield a huge amount of power through that loyalty and love that people have for the game, and there's a huge opportunity to do some real good with that. So I like telling the stories of the people who are doing that, of who are using sport to try and change things. And like I say in the book that yes, there are people like the Megan Rapinos of the world, the Ad Hagerbergs, who are very like actively using their voice consciously to change things, but at root, just playing football as a woman is a political act, right? Because we're constantly told from a very young age that we shouldn't be involved in this game, that it's not right for women to be involved in, that we should be wearing the pink dresses and going and playing with the Barbies and not with the the footballs or the action men or whatever it may be. Like we're very much put in a box and expected to live life a certain way, and having sweaty, physical, strong women that enjoy sport for sport's sake and for fun. Women that's the other thing, is whenever women are expected to exercise, it's to look nice, right? That's the only reason women should exercise, is because they want to look good. They want the bikini body in the summer, and it should be painful. It shouldn't be fun. You should hurt, and it should be horrible. Why can't women enjoy sport for fun? So even just the act of kicking a ball as a child, of becoming a professional footballer, even if you're not a Megan Rapinoe, and you don't care about using your voice in a particular way to change the world, just being a female footballer in and of itself is a political act. It's a pushback against societal norms. And so that's why it's a space I like working in, because every aspect, everything you cover then is a part of that process and that change. So whilst I say, I prefer doing the interviews with Megan Rapinoe or whatever it is, and cover, or a grassroots club doing work in refugee camps in Syria or whatever it may be, whilst that is great, the match reports, they also contribute to that, because contributing and growing women's football and the interest in it is affecting attitudes more generally in society as well. It's pushing back against those ideas. It's, showing little boys and girls that if they pick up a newspaper and see a match report about a women's football, that is normal, that this is a normal thing for you to have in your hands, that it's not an outlier anymore. So that's what is great about this space, is that everything you do within it is a political act, regardless of whether you think it is or not. And that's essentially, in the book, what I'm trying to say is that, it's everything influences everything. Nothing exists in a little bubble. And yeah, it's great that I'm able to champion the stories of both the women that are very, very overt in their activism, but then also the ones that don't even realize they're activists.
And we really applaud you for that, because your articles are very, very interesting. I enjoy reading them every day on The Guardian. Let's go to you, Susie. You, through also your experiences just in the football world, there was a time, despite hanging up your votes, you've continued to highlight each and everything that's happening, on your side. And one moment that stood out, and I actually enjoyed reading about this, is how you and your friends came together to help the, Haitian women's soccer team. Tell us about that moment.
Yeah, so that was sort of the beginning of my activism, I would say. I, at the time I was young, I had 3 babies. I was a stay-at-home mom, really. And I had a career in tech after I graduated from Harvard. But at that point, I had been home for almost 10 years with my 3 kids. And I was still, again, missing the game, missing the connection to my teammates, and wanting to do more. I was ready to do, wanting to do more with my life again. And so basically I was lucky, because at that time, Twitter was already started, Facebook was already started. So just organically, I would be following people who were doing work in using soccer, like Susie was saying, using soccer to make the world a better place. And, just because that's where my heart was taking me on Twitter, right? And so I just happened to be following this guy named Shek Borkowski, who at that time was the coach of the Haitian women's national team. And he put a tweet out that said, I in need of help. We have, many girls on our team that don't have their own cleats. If anyone is in a position to help, DM me. So I DM'd him right away, and I said, tell me what can I do? Because I was like, okay, well, I have these 3 babies at home. I can't physically go there, right? I can't physically go anywhere. I can't. I'm limited into what I can actually do logistically. But I can send you whatever you need, and I can organize that. So he ended up explaining how their system was working, and they had 90 girls in the camp, and they were sharing, I think it was 10 or 12 pairs of cleats between all the girls. They didn't have bras or sports bras, most of them. And so I reached out to, at that time we were just starting our Facebook group for our Harvard women's soccer alumni. So I reached out to my teammates, and they of course just jumped on it with me. And we ended up, one of my teammates was working for New Balance, and, we just everybody reached out to everybody they knew. New Balance donated, box of sports bras. We got, several boxes of cleats, and we sent them all down there. And it was really the first thing I did that made me feel like it doesn't matter that I'm here stuck at home with my 3 babies. I can help, I can do something. My voice is bigger than what I think it is. I actually do have power. Right. So it was very empowering. It was a very important moment for me in sort of my personal journey.
Yeah, and those are some of the points that we need to celebrate, is how women's football also brings women together across the world. So let's say in the past 20 years, what are some of the milestones that need to be celebrated when it comes to women's football so far? Susie Wrack?
Oh, there's so many. I mean, like, I think the US equal pay deal in within the last 6 months is hugely significant because of it going far beyond just the match fees, but into the bonuses that the team get as well. That's just a different level of any other country has achieved. But obviously, that's come off the back of the extraordinary success of the team. It's given them huge bargaining power. So then you're looking at things like Title IX, which enable those women to play and feel empowered to demand more and better from the system in America. So I think that's a really critical point for the world, not just for the US. And would argue that every country needs its own Title IX equivalent in some form. All of the major tournaments in and of themselves are huge turning points, which is, they really explode the game at any particular point. You look at the likes of, I suppose, you look at, I was going to say the Euros this summer. Obviously for England, that is extremely important. And it's like, I don't think you can overstate just how transformational and influential England winning that tournament on home soil at the point in time that it is, and with the level of investment in the team at the moment, that you can't overstate the impact of that. I think it's going to be absolutely transformational. So from an England point of view, this tournament that we've just had is one of the biggest moments in history. And then I think there's also been individuals that have been really important. The likes of Marta, who has really pushed the development of the game. I say that, you've got women's football it's not as good in quality and technical and tactical ability as the men's game. And you can say that because men's football and women's football have been developed in very, very different circumstances. The men play at the elite level at the moment have been groomed for professional football from the age of sort of like 5-6 years old, right? The best women's players in the world, most of them at the moment have had to work at some point or have, studied for significant lengths of time. They haven't had, even the ones that have come through playing football throughout their career from a very young age, have not had the conditions and facilities and strength and conditioning and medical staffing that even the most average of men's players have in the world. So naturally it's going to develop at a different rate and along a different timeline to the men's. So then you've got this situation where you've sort of got outliers in women's football, the ones that are so good that they defy all of the things that hold a women's footballer back from being as good as a men's footballer. The lack of facilities, the lack of good coaching, the lack of education being fitted around their football, and those are the players like the Martas and the Kelly Smiths who have this just technically brilliant, naturally talented, incredibly gifted players who help drive the development of the game by being brilliant at a time when they shouldn't be, right? There's all these barriers to being good players. Marta played barefooted for years, couldn't really play in Brazil, had to move, was bounced around everywhere, ends up in America, plays there. And really sort of despite the players that are successful and brilliant despite all of the stuff that I've listed. So I think it's important to recognize those kind of individuals as well, who aren't necessarily the outspoken ones, but through their football have changed the game because they've been proving that women's footballers have the potential to be brilliant before they have the conditions to make them brilliant, if that makes sense. So in addition to some of the key moments, I would say that there's some key individuals that have also progressed the game in a way that maybe we don't always think about as well.
Yeah. And let me just go to, point number one of, the milestones when about the US team with the equal pay. And that is a discussion that has gone across the world, which is still a burning topic. Let me go to you, Susie Petruccelli. What are your personal thoughts on this?
My personal thoughts are that we're at such an exciting point right now in history. We've seen over the last 5 years, 5 to 10 years, that there has been this movement towards equal pay in other countries, and that they define it in their own way, and there's the details are different for each country, but there has been this sort of like, we have equal pay now. It's our type. It's on our terms, and it may be different than yours, but we have equal pay. And so it has been coming, and every time we see a high, we see Susie's written another article about the next one or whatever. We all get so excited, and we're like, it's coming. And then obviously, in the U.S., it was oh my Lord, what a struggle that was, right? I mean, it's just honestly a miracle that it's happened, right? I mean, US Soccer had to make so many mistakes in the way they were handling their legal case for the sponsors to pressure US Soccer to make Carlos step down so that we could, and it just happened that Cindy Cohn was in line as VP to step in. So I mean, the things that had to happen, the things that had to fall into place for this to happen are pretty miraculous that it all worked out. And we're just so grateful. I think, we went leaps and bounds forward when that did happen. To me now, the next step, logically, which is where this, project came from, is that, the next step is to go international and, to make the move and ask FIFA to equalize the prize money. And I actually, I feel like, even just since, I was talking to Harvard about this fellowship and we were thinking about it, I feel like even just since that time, just a few months ago, the amount of momentum and the amount of support that I'm feeling around it when I talk to people about the project is so amazing. I mean, I actually was a little nervous. I was like, are people going to just, shut the door? We've had so many no's over the years, right? But I'm not feeling that way at all. And I actually am having people come up to me with ideas like, oh, it could be done this way. It could be done this way. It could be done in this timeline. It could be done with percentages. It could be done with, like a commitment by FIFA to keep doubling the prize money, which is what they've sort of, what they've sort of been doing the last couple of cycles, which would put it at an exponential growth, which, and these economists are explaining it to me. Well, if the growth of the women's prize money is on an exponential growth, it's going to meet with the men's prize money in 16 years or, whatever it is. So it's been really, exciting, and I'm feeling very hopeful that there's enough people that believe that understand that it's the right thing to do, and that we're going to get there.
Yeah. Susie, some analysts argue that even the women's team they're supposed to actually be paid way much more than the men's team. And the argument was based on what we've been saying recently in the women's game. Let's talk about England, for example. The women's team brought all the glory, where people have been waiting for such a long time for the men's team to do that. If you come down in Africa, the last time the South African men's team won the AFCON title is in 1996. The women's team actually won it this year. So you can see that. So there are actually other analysts are calling for, the women are bringing the glory back home. Why not just invest and actually make sure they're paid more because they are working hard and they're actually showing the results? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can completely argue that, like, it's a completely legitimate thing to say, right? The comeback is, oh, well, they don't make enough as much money, so they once they're bringing in as much as the men, then you can have equal pay. But that's not how any business works, right? Like any new business, you don't wait for it to reach a point of success before you invest in it. You invest in it to make it successful. I was chatting to Moya Dodds, from Australia, former Australian international, who's worked for FIFA and is on the AFC executive committee, and she was saying it's like ice cream, right? Like it's like you've got the creator of vanilla ice cream. Chocolate ice cream doesn't exist yet. You've got the creator of vanilla ice cream, and there's a worker who comes up to, vanilla ice cream, selling loads, doing really well, making loads of money, and someone comes along and says, hey, we got this chocolate ice cream, maybe we should sell and market this as well. And they go, no, you go and see how well you do with your chocolate ice cream, and then maybe we'll think about it. Or they go, yeah, let's make this chocolate ice cream as big as vanilla ice cream and occupy a whole new market of non-vanilla loving people, and chuck money into advertising and making more of it and pushing it out to everyone. And the idea that you wouldn't do that and that you would just go, no, sorry, we're just going to stick with this vanilla ice cream because that's what we've always done. When that's successful, then we'll think about it. Like, that's just not a thing that happens in any business anywhere. So why is it that with women's sport and women's football, it has to be super successful before we consider equal pay and prize money and investment? Like, that's not a thing that happens. And if anything, I'd say we should go the other way, and we should actually invest more into women's football, because FIFA and governing bodies of football around the world, they are not-for-profit bodies, right? They're supposed to champion fairness and accessibility and all of these things that they should champion, but yet they still spend more and invest more in men's football over women's, when men's football is in a perfectly healthy place in and of itself. Clubs make loads of money. It doesn't need the extra investment. Women's football needs it. So why not tip the scale the other way? Why not say we're going to invest 75% into women's football and 25% into men's, and tip the balance? Women's football has been chronically underinvested in for years. These are reparations. We're actually tipping the balance the other way. So for me, equality and going equal is actually a minimum, right? That's the minimum of what we should expect. And I think on the prize money, there's so many issues I've got with FIFA and the prize money, because they doubled it, didn't they? But the men's increased by 40 million, where the women's increased by 30 million from doubling it. And it's well, no, actually the gap's got bigger, not smaller. And so there's, the idea that 400 and something million goes to the prize pot for the men's World Cup and it's 60 million for the women's is just so staggeringly bad, that I despair it. I love what you're doing, Susie, with this fellowship. It's sounds like it's going to be absolutely brilliant, because it's such and I think in a way you've got to sort of have the argument of going, well, actually, when you think logically about it, the balance should be tipped completely the other way, and then people might be a little bit more open to the idea of it being equal. If you're if you go sort of the extreme and say, well, this is actually the logical conclusion, equality is the minimum.
Yeah. And from talking about equal pay, financial support, investment, this just shows one thing: when it comes to women's football, the journey has not been easy. It has had its own, challenges. So let's just talk about some of those challenges, and you, Susie Petruccelli, now that you are also on the pitch, some of those challenges, women who are in the game, including even the supporting cast. Let me talk about that, the writers like Susie, Wrack, the media coverage. Talk to us about those challenges you have faced personally, and you have also seen other people face, and the solutions just to some of these challenges.
Yeah, I think we've sort of been hinting at all of this, right? It's basically, if we could go, what happened was, 100 years ago, right? Women's soccer started to grow, and it was growing so quickly and so fast that it scared the men. Really, it's what happened, right? And so they shut it down. And they shut it down in England and Brazil and Germany, and it hadn't even got started really in the United States yet. They banned it in England. We all know that, right? And they were punished. What I didn't know, I just learned, is that they were punishing referees if they were caught refereeing a women's game. I didn't know that. It's like the pieces of the history and the pieces of the details of what happened and the oppression and the ways we were kept out of the game deliberately. like keep shocking me. And you know, it's like, oh man, why am I still so surprised? But it is, and it hurts. It really hurts. And you know, I think that we were just, you know, we were deliberately kept out of the game for most of the 20th century. And you know, and so if we could go back to that moment and give those women all of the same exact support and all of the same exact resources and encouragement and investment that the men have done all these years, and we would be in the same place that they're in right now. We would be in exactly the same place that they're in right now. And they really don't deserve to tell us that we you know, that we're not as good as they are. That's insulting. And I think that's really unfair of them. So you know, we've been deliberately barred from the game and they took advantage of that, right? And they grew their fandom, and they grew their, you know, they started, you know, they had decades to grow their revenue streams, and so you know, we deserve that time too, and we deserve all that investment, and we deserve the respect to grow at our own pace. And you know, we that's really what, and I agree, it is like reparations. That's a great word. It's a great word for it. I think Susie nailed it with that one.
Yeah. And Susie, on your side, when it comes to the coverage, talk to us about, you know, those challenges, you know, the first step, just trying to tell people, you know what, women's football is a serious game. You need to take it seriously. This is not a joke. People are putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this.
Yeah, I mean, when I started writing about women's football at The Guardian, there were no full-time roles at any national media outlet in the UK available for anyone wanting to cover women's football, like broadcast or written. So like I was working on desk doing layout and editing on, you know, all kinds of sports, men's football, everything. And was asked to write a weekly column, and that was like a huge step, and that was only in 2017, right? Like, so the huge explosion in the media is actually very new. And you know, we've now got, I'm saying I'm out here in Austria, and there's a table of 4 other full-time writers for national newspapers sitting over there, all working on women's football. And you know, that was unheard of 18 months ago, let alone back in 2017. So like, it's really exploded. But there's obviously challenges that come with that. I mean, you know, we struggle for space. Like, I'm actually very lucky, and The Guardian are very, very invested in women's football from an ideological point of view, as much as a like financial point of view as well. And like, really, I get exactly the same word counts as they do for big men's games. I get the same like promoting on the website and all that kind of stuff. I know a lot of others struggle with that kind of thing, with editors that don't really care, with just, you know, even demanding the like being able to go to some of these games abroad. You know, some really struggle to, you know, get the approval for the funding to be able to travel out and cover, you know, England a month after they've won a European Championship title. You know, it's a real difficult thing to demand coverage, and then we you know, then we get criticized by fans for not covering their team in the right way or at all, or not covering the Championship or the National League. And it's like, well, hang on, I'm one person covering this whole league, and well, the whole of women's football internationally for this newspaper. There's only so many places I can be at once, and I, at some point, whilst I can push back to a certain extent against what my editors want, some of the time I have to pick and choose my battles, right? And then there's all of the logistical problems of the game professionalizing. You know, we used to have great access to players, and now that's getting harder and harder, because the more professional clubs become, the closer the way they do things becomes the way the men's teams do things, and that makes our access harder, which is counter productive for clubs, because it limits the coverage, and this game needs to grow. The men's game like doesn't necessarily need the coverage to the same extent that the women's games does, to bring in listeners, readers, whatever, interest, fans, and that's not necessarily respected by clubs and federations and stuff in the way that that it perhaps should be, that we're like quite essential to the growth of the game, in the same way that the reporters on men's football 100 years ago were pretty crucial to the growth of men's football. And then, obviously working in sports journalism is a very, very male dominated space. And there's a lot of dinosaur attitudes and lots of sexism, lots of misogyny, and you battle that all the time. I'm lucky in that, like, the Guardian is a great place to work. The desk are lovely. I worked on the desk on production before I was a writer, so I know them all. Even when I'm not on the office, I know who's on the other end of that phone. And I'm lucky in that, the women's football press pack in and of itself is a very nice bunch, and it's a very progressive bunch. But going to awards ceremonies and things that are more generalized, that's when you sort of meet some of the less savory characters covering football on the men's side and sports more broadly, and that can be a challenge. You sort of have quite a thick skin to work in this industry. I always hate when I get the question, someone goes to me, they ask you what you do, and you say, I'm a sports journalist, football writer, and they're like, oh, so you like football then? It's like, yes. Like, you have to like it to work in this industry. No one would do what I do if you didn't like it. Like, as a woman, you wouldn't put up with it. You would go and have a much nicer, quieter life doing pretty much anything else. So I always am really baffled by that question, because it's just so freaking ridiculous. Obviously misogynistic in the first instance, and the assumption is that as a woman you don't like football, but then B, that you would even bother fighting in this space if you didn't actually love the sport and care about it. But yeah, there's so many challenges. There's just basic logistical ones. Like I said, we did the press conference in a tent today with no desks. The Wi-Fi was dodgy, no plug sockets, and this is England's first game after winning the Euros, and Austria are semi-finalists. And then you've got to I had to file 800 words within 20 minutes of the press conference finishing, and not having anywhere to work, and so writing a little bit in a taxi that's taking me back to my hotel room so I can quickly file the rest of it before I can go and get some food and things like that. Like, there's just so many different issues, from logistics to the internal battles you have to wage at organisations that don't necessarily believe in investing in women's football, particularly the Guardian, like I say, extremely invested in women's football, really, really cares about it. I think our Euros coverage and the supplements and the podcasts and all that kind of stuff really showed that. But there are others where, you get a couple of good editors who care, but then the organisation as a whole doesn't believe in it. And, a lot of media organisations are owned by some quite unsavoury characters in and of themselves, and it's very much a tokenistic thing. And so there's all those internal battles you wage. Basically battling every day is the name of the game of this industry and this job.
Yeah, trust me, I understand and feel you. I've been there before, and it's a whole lot of steps. We have to continue, breaking those barriers as the days go by. I wish we'd continue chatting for a long time. This is a very, very nice discussion, but we're running out of time. So let me just ask the next question. What do you think is the next chapter for women's football, Susie Petruccelli?
I think the next chapter for women's football is we're going to start seeing a massive amount of investment money go into it. I think it's pretty clear that, we've seen the rise of the Premier League. We've seen the rise of English football, right? And that started, so many decades ago, right? And if you think about people who, wish they had gotten in early on a Premier League team, right? And we're seeing it in the United States with the MLS, right? People are already saying, oh, I wish I had gotten in 30 years ago or 20 years ago on an MLS team. You could have gotten in for a few $100,000 or less, right? And now they're worth millions. So I think we're at that pivotal moment in women's soccer, and I think people are recognizing that. And I think we're at that point, that early phase in a sport where the people who are at early entry, right, the people who are investing minimal amounts of money too compared to the men's side, are seeing these crazy, dynasties happen, like Olympic Lyonnais, and in the United States it's UNC, right? The UNC women's team, they invested early and they really believed in their women's team, and they dominated for the last half a century. And they produced most of our, and still are producing, right? I think there were at least 2 women from UNC who played in the final, played for England, right? Or played in that final at Wembley, and including maybe
and
one
Serena.
of the coaches. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
3 players and Serena.
And Serena, right? So I think everybody's realizing that like the investment works, and now is the time from a business perspective. Like, put your money there. It's a ridiculous investment. So that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah. What about you, Susie Wrack? What do you think is the next chapter for the women's football, and especially on the broadcasting side of it?
Completely agree with Susie. I think in terms, like, on all of that, in terms of from like the media point of view, I think we're going to see a big shift in the way the game is covered, and how seriously it's taken. We're like, in England, we're talking about journalists, like 1 at each paper. I think we're going to see that start to shift. We had quite a lot of our men's journalists covering the women's Euros. We're looking at kind of how we can expand our freelance base. I don't think it's that long before we get another full-time reporter. Like, I think that is the next step, moving towards a point where we've got the same sort of number of people covering the women's game as we have covering the men's game. That's like the logical thing, right? Or like closer towards 50-50 women and sports coverage across newspapers and websites and things like that, and other media outlets and broadcasters. I think that's not going to be a quick thing. I think that's going to take a huge amount of time. The thing that I really want to see shift more immediately, and I think is starting to, I think the US equal pay deal speaks to it, is a little bit of a change from a gratitude mentality within the game. I think women more generally in society are demanding change and better and more, and equality and the ability to walk down the street without getting abused and all of those kind of things. And I want to see, with the investment that's coming in, more of the players going, yeah, we deserve this and we deserve more, and start demanding more. I think that's the next step, is we need them to be less oh yeah, it's really great, we've got this, let's keep our heads down and keep plowing on and more will come. No, we need to learn the lesson of all struggles for everything throughout history, and actually demand more. And that's the next step, accelerating the pace of change for me, is players feeling empowered, and I suppose feeling less removing this gratitude mentality, essentially.
Yeah. And for anyone who wants to get your books, want to reach out to you and just get into the discussion about women's football, let me just say the title of the books again: A Woman's Game, The Rise, Fall and Rise Again of Women's Football. That is by Susie Wrack, and Raised a Warrior, One Woman's Odyssey by Susie Petruccelli. Let's start with you, Susie Petruccelli. Talk to us how anyone can be, how one can access your book, number one, and also how one can, want to work with you when it comes to women's football.
Well, my book is available online. You just can Google it. You can buy it in, at your favorite online bookstore. I'm easily reachable, and I'm on Instagram, Susie Petruccelli, and I'm on Twitter, Susie Soozie, and I love messages from anybody all the time, and I always answer them. I love to hear from people. So please reach out.
Yes, Susie Wrack.
Yeah, the same in terms of the book. It's available everywhere pretty much. All good bookshops and online retailers is the line, isn't it? Yeah, and then me, same as Susie, Instagram, Twitter mainly, Facebook, Suzanne Wrack on Facebook, Susie Wrack on Twitter and Insta. And yeah, like always happy for people to reach out and discuss things, pass on stories, like chat about the future of the women's game and where it's going. Like I love conversing about women's football. So yeah, always happy.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I felt so sad for having to wrap this up. It was such a wonderful discussion. I had so many points to talk about, but we can always do that later on as we count down to the main summit in Greece, that is in Athens, Greece, which will be happening on the 22nd and 23rd of September. It's just it's less than 19 days to this event. So if you want to grab your tickets, just scan the code on your screen, and there's a discount code, which is Athens WFS 10. You can do that and get to be part of this big platform where we'll be talking to stakeholders, everyone involved. We have former players, we have investors, everyone who is very familiar with with women's football will be there, and we'll be discussing everything concerning women's football and its growth across the globe. As Susie Petruccelli said, this is the time. Do not miss out on investing into women's football. You have already seen what women can do on the pitch, so they need your support, financially, mentally, emotionally. Do what you can to make sure the women in your specific countries, and when I say this, I really talk about Africa, because I'm very passionate and I understand the challenges women in Africa have to go through just to kick a ball on the pitch. So please go out there and make sure you support the women's team out there. Thank you so much, Susie Petruccelli, and thank you so much, Susie Wrack. Both authors, they have talked about their books. Please don't forget to go out there so that you can also get to understand more about the women's game, the journey, the revolution, and everything that everything that is happening at the moment when it comes to women's football. Thank you so much, ladies, for doing this with us here at Athens Women's Football Series, countdown to the main summit in Athens, Greece. That is the Athens Women's Football Summit. I've been your host, Shon Osimbo. Have a lovely evening from this side of the world.
Thank you. Susie, go get your food.
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right, thank you.